Good morning. Welcome to Echelon Orchid episode 28, and it's Sunday coffee with my good friend, TK. Good morning, TK. How are you?
Good morning, Dan. How you doing?
Well, it's the sun's starting to come up here in Denver. There's things that we've talked about in the past. I'm out there on the path of starting a distillery. And so, while everyone else is only working one job, I tend to figure out ways to work 4 or 5 in order to be where the puck is eventually going to be, which is what I continued with. Like my parents get really upset with me because I voted pretty much every chance I can for a Libertarian Party. Like if they're out there, I do it, and they get upset. And I say, look, I'm not worried about where I want the country to be 4 years from now. I'm voting because where I want to see the country be 40 years from now. And if we had all done this 40 years ago, maybe we would have a third party candidate. And, because I believe, I don't dislike Joe Biden, nor do I dislike President Trump, but I kind of feel like in some ways they're the two sides of the same coin in some ways. But I keep wanting to see, and I hope that at some point, maybe in my lifetime, that we'll have a third party candidate. I would love to have more of a parliamentary, like what they have in the UK, where there's, a dozen parties, and then maybe we'll get some real change.
But even with that, there's really 3, right? There's the Tories, there's the Liberals, and then there's the Liberal Democrats, which are more libertarian. And I think once Patty Ashdown passed away, they lost their big voice in having in that rule of dissent, right? I mean, that's really where that third party comes in. Is there's enough people that you have to have a coalition with them. And that was one of the fun parts about living in England, and even coming back, like if you want fun in politics, go watch Prime Minister's Questions on C-SPAN that they do periodically during the week, where he just has to take all comers on the floor of Parliament, right? But I think when you start talking people's voting habits and the news isn't there to inform you; it's there to shock you. It's there to agitate you, right? Because once you get agitated about something, then you're paying attention, right? And it's about getting butts and seats and eyes. And then if you say, hey, most people, if you look at the ads that are out there on both sides, we play to emotions, right? We don't play to people's sense, like, we call it, the new thing out there is called sense making. And I've seen people in their profiles on social media say they're a sense maker. I don't want to, I can't wrap my head around who gets to be determined as the sense maker, or the same person that gets who decides what decent content is that goes on the internet, right? If people start talking about that. But I think when you say I want to have a longer view, right? Because that's really what you're talking about. Like what people, social psychologists call it the long now. Right? How do I take that out? There's a group called the Long Now Society. They imagine what the planet's going to be like 10,000 years from now, right? But if you can say, what do we want it to be 50 years from now? That requires a level of self-sacrifice that most people don't have. Because when you start talking about climate change and some of the radical proposals that, we've got to do this or we're going to be off the planet by 13 years, 15 years, I think you can have the ability to understand that there are certain aspects about climate change that have the potential to be catastrophic. There's certain aspects that financially we have to get our heads around, that either we are going to do it or we're not, and that we can have a discussion that on both sides of that coin, right? And the fact now that Jordan Peterson has a statement that I really love. He talks about when it comes to free speech and the politicization of free speech. There's a marked difference between telling people, hey, we don't want you to say that, right? Hey, political correctness in its base form when it first started was really like that. Hey, we're going to change who we call people, right? We're going to have hyphenated Americanism. We're going to soft pedal things. We're not going to say people are fat. We're going to say they're over, whatever it is. They came up with these euphemisms for them. Like, it's like when we were a kid, or when I was a kid, I don't know when you were a kid. When I was a kid, they had 3 types of pants. You had slim, regular, and husky. All right? Husky was fat kid pants. right? Probably still is. I don't know what they name them, right? But we've gotten to this thing where it's like, hey, we don't want you to say that. And then on the other side of it is this, we are going to command you to say things, right? Where you now have people like, hey, you have to agree with Black Lives Matter. You have to agree with whatever's on the more on the far right. If somebody comes out and says something like, yes, Black Lives Matter, but I think the movement itself has been co-opted in a lot of ways by some very bad people. Whether you agree with that or not, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is you make a statement like that says, yes, Black Lives Matter, right? But I also don't think in the current form we're helping out. I think we're actually hurting, and this is why. You are compelled to say Black Lives Matter and stop talking, to be in the media and be part of that mainstream, right? That's emotional. That's today. We want to try to change stuff right now. So when you start talking about voting for, pick a candidate, or voting for anything, but some local measure of how we're going to change governance, right? What you're saying is, hey, I want you to ignore your emotions and vote with your head. Well, since when in the last 20 or 30 years have we asked anybody to do anything that wasn't emotionally involved? And social media is at the front of that, right? There's no dislike button. There's a cancel button, but there's no dislike button, right? So you're always trying to get people to various gradients of like. And I think that's where we kind of fall apart.
Yeah, and it is. And this is where I kind of, I was getting out here in Denver taking, classes on distilling, mainly, I know academically how to do it. I've been making beer for many years, which is legal, but there's always the nuances. And I think, if you're going to do something, then, you can't do it halfway.
No.
Do it, and you need to, you have to be the hero in that story. And no matter what it is, and of course, I'm doing something because I'm hoping that eventually this distillery will be an overnight success 20 years from now. Right. But if I don't put in the work now, then it will never be there in 20 years. And that's why in my mind, it's because we're in the election season. I look at these things and I'm talking to the kids because I'm like, hey, who do you want to vote for? And they're like, well, I'm going to vote for President Trump. I'm like, well, why? Well, because Joe Biden's going to take our money. Well, okay, why do you think that? Because, I'm trying to explain to them, like, no, that's not the president's job. If Joe Biden comes into office, in January, whatever it is, 21st, 22nd, can't remember, something like that.
Third Monday in January.
Yeah. If the Senate doesn't pass that law and the House does not pass that law, no taxes is changing.
Right.
Right.
Well, over time, right? It's over time with media, social, the way that our country's kind of flown, we've given primacy to the office.
Yeah.
Right. And if you go back and you look at the design of the government, the power of the presidency was in the bully pulpit, not in thing. Like when he or she someday sends a budget to Congress, it's a request for what they would like, what the executive branch thinks is important, right? And I think where as a nation we've gone berserk is the legislative branch is abdicated a lot of their legislative power, right? And I always say, if you don't like the potholes in your street, go get yourself a new congressman. If you don't like your foreign policy, go get yourself a new senator. But understand what each body is supposed to do and thereby what each individual is supposed to provide you. And I think the biggest tragedy of the last 25, 30 years is the 24-hour news cycle and the demand for constant information and answers, right? The House was designed to be a street fight, right? And the Senate was designed to be a deliberative body, right? And so having had changed how we get senators to be senators from being appointed by governors to being freely elected in the manner that they are, do we want to change that? Right? I mean, in Virginia, our governor is only allowed to have one term, right? And I used to think that was a great idea, but there's something to be said to play on people's ego that they can win again. Right? Because once you can't be reelected, you're free to do whatever you want. And for the most part, that is a good thing, right? Because you're hoping it's going to free people to make the right decision for the people, which is in how they legislate, and be a good, prudent representative of that. But in a lot of states, you've seen, especially with response to Corona, like that becomes imperial, right? Hey, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to take away your freedoms to do X, Y, and Z because of this pandemic, and I don't have to tell you why. Right. And that, I think, or whatever it is. I mean, the pandemic kind of raised it and elevated it to a much higher plane. But, I get, my big problem now with everything is we can't have a discussion about things, right? If everybody comes out and says, hey, with Dr. Fauci, here's the science, and people that's the path that the media has chosen to believe. I'm not saying the guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm just saying that's the path the media has chosen to believe. Anybody that's come out, any doctor, any medical professional /MD/PhD that's come out and had anything that's been in stark disagreement with that was roundly shouted down or pushed off to the side, right? We have to, as a society, and this is where we're having problems with the younger folks, is get to the point where we can have dissent and argument, right? Because that's what makes us great. That's what makes humanity great, is our ability to say, hey, I really think this is a great idea. I want to go out in the public space and do it, and have to defend it, and defend it on a level playing field, right, of ideas, right? And it's not getting canceled because somebody disagrees with you and things like that, right? It's almost like it's almost sad to watch now in the public discourse. Like, we're having arguments about whether we're going to have debates or not, like for publicly elected officials, right? No, you need to get out there. Like, I'm also a big believer, by the way, that the Klan should have the microphone every afternoon, because the more you let people like that speak, but like really groups that are hate groups that are out of the mainstream, that are violent, and on any spectrum, let them have the microphone every afternoon, because eventually people are going to go, hey, this is not right. Get rid of them. Right? Hiding abhorrent behavior never helps. Right? Yeah. It's like the son of Sam, like, oh, he's a really quiet guy. Yeah, because he was plotting murdering a bunch of people. That's why. He had a lot of shit going on in his head. Right? Yeah, he's a good neighbor, right? Why? Because he was in his house all day thinking about killing a bunch of people. At night he went out and did it. Right? Yeah, you didn't see him. You didn't hear him. Right? Get evil out in the public eye so people can recognize what it looks like, so we can get rid of it.
It's very true. So when I was going back with the kids, and this was an opportunity for me to explain, look, the Constitution is quite clear. The 16th Amendment says that Congress is the one that shall deal with tax revenue. It's not the president. I was like, this is because they hear things from school, all these things. I'm like, look, this is why the Constitution is great in these things. And then on another side, going, because there, someone, wanting to really talk about how, the president has mishandled COVID. And I said, well, maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. I said, but there's failure to go around. The real issue comes back down to me is all the governors. Oh, no, that's not true. It's not their fault. The president's supposed to do this, this. I said, no, state is the one that mandates health, not the federal government. Well, what about Medicare and Medicaid? Well, they're programs. Okay. They're programs in health insurance that have to be implemented by the state. I said, what you have to look at, which the media has downplayed significantly when everyone wants to talk about how Cuomo is this great governor. I said, no, he's not. Literally, he told the federal government, if you try and come in here and tell us how we're going to manage COVID, I'm going to sue you. And you know what? As much as I don't like what Cuomo has done, he's right. In this case, the federal government tell the state what to do. Right.
But if you go back even further, like if you go back to Katrina, Governor Blanco, who was governor of Louisiana at the time, was absent the day they taught the 10th Amendment. Basically, the governor of Mississippi, before the hurricane, called the federal government, called the president, and said, hey, we need help. And then the federal government, based on a shitload of really good laws, is allowed to come in and oversee and help and manage and do whatever is needed to be done to protect the citizenry. Louisiana didn't do that. Right? That's a failure of leadership at the governor's office. Everybody wants to have the governor's gavel when stuff's going well. Nobody wants it when things are going wrong. Right? And it's ego and hubris to say, don't worry about it, we got it. Oh, you don't got it. Right? It's one of the magical things about the government, right? And I think there's there's less and less things that are about states' rights. But when you look at healthcare, one of the conundrums of healthcare is there are 50 anthems, right? One for each state.
Right.
And that's by design, because you're right. Healthcare was a thing. And so when we started talking about ACA or making sure, which I agree with, that every citizen has full equal access to high quality healthcare at a reasonable price, right? Because nothing's free, right? We're just talking about at what level you're going to pay for it, right? And is it a proportion of your income? How does that work, right? Once you knew the insurance industry was not going to go away, right? They weren't just going to pack it up and say, oh, you're right, you got us, we're out of business, right? So you had to negotiate with them. Then you added another level of federal bureaucracy, and then you exempted most of the Fortune 50, Fortune 500, I don't know how many, but you exempted quite a few of those to get what you thought you wanted passed. When the original argument for wanting to do ACA was that there were 45 million uninsured Americans and people couldn't have healthcare portability. That's Congress not wanting to legislate.
Yeah. And right? Isn't it funny that, because of all of that, what the ACA has been watered down is probably not the right word, but it has been, declared it's just a tax.
But I think that's really where it was headed from day one, right? But the net is, how have we effectively taken care of those? That if you want to, because that's the number I caught on to early on, right? Give me 45 million people, right, and go get them health insurance, right? And then legislate that way to do that, right? I mean, the healthcare companies are not shy; they're not short of making money. Right. Again, it's about you're taking something that is there for the public good, and as a public company, what's the first responsibility of that CEO? To generate shareholder value. Right. So it's already in juxtaposition. And that's the bigger problem. Like anything we do in the government is what's the juxtaposition of our intent versus our action? But that's a life skill, right? What's your intent and what's your action? Right. And be like, I didn't mean to do that. I know you didn't, but how did you set up? What was your intent? How did you manage that into your actions? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's where envy, hate, all that other stuff come from.
Right. And, and even when we go back and talk about Katrina, this gets back into, again, as I try to explain to one of my mom's friends, look, states' rights are that's one of the most founding principles for the Constitution and why it is so powerful. Once the funds from the federal government have been given to the governor, it doesn't mean that the governor necessarily has to use those funds where they're supposed to. There should be, and in a lot of times the governors do, but we keep giving them money and they keep saying, oh yeah, we promised we're going to use it for this, but then they never do. And actually, so my friend Amanda, who's listening right now, we actually took the emergency management class at George Washington. And this was, Katrina was a good example of a bad example of emergency management, because everything that could have gone wrong did. And, while the news says FEMA messed up, well, when you look back at the data, it was really the governor. It's unfortunate because there's, it really messed up quite a bit, and it was likely preventable.
Preventable. The mitigation would have been much greater, right? I think that's probably the right way to say it. The mitigation would have been much greater, right? And I think again, how many people left that area and never came back, right? I mean, you think about, some people went to Houston to escape it, and they got there and like, well, hey, Houston's not bad. I'll stay here. There's work. I can go do this. I can go do that, right? And what are the second and third order consequences, right? And I'm not absolving one party of any responsibility, but I'm just saying, when you start, I think in certain cases now, it's how can we embarrass the other party for our gain in the next election cycle, right? And that's the more insidious thing, right? And it doesn't matter. I mean, everybody's trying to, get that leverage and get that leg up, right? We have an ugly battle going on here in Virginia Beach with our congressional district right now. And there's not one candidate won't get up and do debates, and then everybody's just flinging mud. I can't even watch TV during this season. Right? My head wants to go crazy because nothing is about what are you going to do to help be part of the solution, right? And I think that when you look at, even you go back into the early 80s, actually, I don't even have to go back that far. Go back to the Clinton presidency. Because he was rolling and lost midterms in 94, which brought in Newt Gingrich, Contract for America, and for the first time since 1954, had given the Republicans a House. Okay. As now the second half of his first term was coming, it was largely inconsequential, and the administration was seen to be a bunch of really smart people that had no experience in leading, legislating, governing. Right. He, like Reagan, and like others before him, to ensure greatness, said, you know what? I want to get laws passed. I have an agenda. I want to get shit done. I can't win over there. So what can I go over there with? And we can negotiate. I can make mine. The economy started turning around, right? And they had negotiated to a certain extent with the House Republicans and Newt Gingrich to get shit done, just like Reagan did with Tip O'Neill when the Democrats were in office, when Democrats were running the House, and so on and so forth, all the way back through time with great presidents. What we're missing today, and that's security's second term, by the way, right? And years later, I was at an event at, I think GW or Georgetown, one of the things, and Newt Gingrich was speaking to a big group of people, and they were talking about the rolling economy and everything like that. And he basically had to go back and go, look, this is how lawmaking works. This is the brand thing. And these are but he wasn't doing it to say, he understood that the president gets all the credit for a great economy and all the blame for a bad economy. He was saying, look, he came to us and we worked together, right? Reagan came to Tip O'Neill and they worked together. This is what good governance looks like. Right. And this is why the nation was hugely successful economically in that time frame. All right. What type of, we haven't had, that kind of conciliation for a while. Right. I mean, the last two presidencies, and it's gotten out of hand now. Right. And I tell people, it's like, look, don't like the president, but are you voting against him or are you voting for the other guy? Right. And that's when you start saying, hey, I want a libertarian candidate. You're saying, hey, I want to vote for somebody. I don't want to vote against somebody.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, I happen to like Joe Jurgensen. I would go back if Tulsi Gabbard or Andrew Yang had won the Democratic nomination. I would have likely voted for them because there was a lot of things they did that I believe. And this is where I get, this is where that aspect where we were just talking about, and the amount of vitriol hatred for Joe Biden from the side of the I like to call them the Republicans, the Democrats and the Republicans, because that's pretty much how I feel about them at this point. You can't say Joe Biden has not done something in his 47 years of being in public service, especially when you look back. He only became a millionaire after the Obama administration, right? He was not, it's like, wait a minute, this guy, where every other person in Congress is basically a millionaire, he was ranked as like the in terms of the wealthiest in there, like the third poorest. Like there was only two other people with less money. So it's not like this guy was, doing. He's sponsored a lot of good things. Has he done things I don't like? Absolutely. But
don't pick out somebody that's in elected office and go, do you like everything they did? No. Right.
Like if you don't look, because there is, depending on which, I still believe President Trump winds up winning by another electoral college split. I think he takes Michigan and Ohio. And that's what winds up pushing him over the electoral vote, which is almost the same as what it was in the last election, because I think Biden made a poor choice with Kamala Harris. He should have gone and got someone that could have got him. Like if I was him, I would have been getting Governor Whitmer, immediately, because that would have taken, I believe,
Michigan off the table.
I think so. That's my opinion. I still believe that the Democrats want AOC in 2024, but if you don't look for the good and that what the other party has to offer. When they become in office, nothing will get done, and we'll just have this continue to divide.
Yeah,
And
we kick a really beat up can down the road for another 4 years as we go deeper in debt and more divided as a country rather than over. But that's in relationships. That's in life. You look at it in the macro of the U.S., right, and the 370 plus million people that live in the U.S. But really, like, what goes on in your personal life, right?
Yeah.
What are you not willing to talk about with other people? What do you what becomes, when do you start holding on to something good or bad so tightly that you can't give it up in order to make yourself a success?
Like, I'm not entirely sure if this is true right now, but, my friend Amanda, who's having coffee and watching us at the moment, she used to be a very bleeding heart Democrat. I'm wondering now that she's starting to make money, if whether or not she's turned more, Republican in her ways for wanting taxes. But you still can't take the aspect of, if you want a community to be better, then you have to invest in their education. Because again, people that are going to be running this country, just like I said in the beginning about why I vote libertarian, 40 years from now, these are the kids that have got to be able to take this country and push forward. She says she's still 1,000% Democrat. I don't believe her, but I've got into it with teachers and stuff. I'm not a big believer that all public schools are crap and all private schools are great. Quite the opposite, right? I think what public schools do exceedingly well is this: they do special needs programs, right? Because they've been from the federal government on down to the smallest locality. Everybody, you're not going to find anybody that says no, let's not help special needs kids, right? So it's something everybody can get behind, and they do it really well. And special needs teachers, much like I think K through 5, the elementary teachers, that's a calling, right? Because that's a certain group thing you want to get there. High school education, the other piece that we do very well are gifted programs. Right? In Virginia Beach, I think there's 11 or 12 high schools. Most of them have some sort of academy: STEM, math and science, arts, health, entrepreneurship, an IB program, and they do those programs exceedingly well. And the kids that come out of there are really set for success as they move forward in life. It's the other 80% that we have to worry about, right? That we don't, and it's some of it. I think that one of the biggest problems in public education is parental apathy, where parents are like, "Hey, a lot of the parents this having to stay home from school because COVID is less about education and how do I get childcare." Right, and you've built your education system around also being childcare, right? And to a certain extent, that's always been true, but it's now more than ever, right? I believe that every teacher, and if we're going to say, I want teachers to be highly paid, competitive, protect people, and everything else, because I do believe it's that important. And I want the schools to be cathedrals, and I want them to be great places of higher learning, right? Where kids can go in and they can ask questions that make people upset, right? Why does it work this way? Why? No, I don't want little robots. I want young people that by the time they're adults are just asking everybody why. Right? Why do we do things this way? And challenge, the old saying, challenge that paradigm, right? And but how do we get there, right? We tried probably starting in the 80s and then moving forward, certainly into now, to where we wanted to test the teachers. And I think I'll speak from, because I was leaving Massachusetts about the time this happened. They started to test the teachers, but they did this omnibus test where the teachers had to take this, and I'm talking primarily high school teachers, had to take this far-reaching test on everything. Well, if you're a science teacher, what level of history knowledge do I have to properly teach science? I don't, right? And it's just like, hey, we want to do the lowest, we want to get this through as quickly as we can, right? So the TK plan is always every subject matter, you take a test that proves you have competency in your subject matter. You're a professional, right? Pilots, lawyers, doctors,
tech professionals, everybody, they go get certified, and those certificates run out periodically, and you have to go back and get continuing education units. You have to do things to prove that you are better. Would you get in the airplane if that person did not get in a simulator every 6 months to prove they can handle emergency procedures, right? Would you go to a doctor that wasn't doing their CEUs and wasn't doing all those things? No, you wouldn't. But yet every morning you'll drop your kid off to somebody you don't know whether they're competent or not. And that's any school. That's public, private, whatever, right? You're saying, hey, we're not requiring competency tests of the teachers, right? And the teachers can at me all they want, but you're not proving that you're competent because you got out of school and you passed whatever it is. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how have your skills degraded? How closely to retirement are you, right? These are all natural human emotions in every profession, but we're not asking you for 12 years to touch the next generation of humans that we want to be great. All right.
This is one of those things which I have a big pet peeve on, why when people, shit all over a liberal arts degree, I go, you clearly don't know what a liberal arts degree is then, because some of the best attorneys and almost, I believe a majority of our Supreme Court justices, their undergrad is in liberal arts.
Yeah.
Because, and then they went to law school, even some medical doctors, because it's,
Jason Pittman's undergrad English.
Right. Understanding, and you've said it plenty of times, being able to do the written and spoken word is never going to go out of style.
Not at all.
And I, if I had not, I wish that if I could have gone back my undergrad, because I gravitate a lot towards, the philosophies of, just that particular aspect of everything coming up from Socrates to, all
to Descartes, Socrates.
Descartes, and just like, Patrick Roy, who was a goalie, all of these philosophies and helping us think, which, is that critical thinking skill, the process to go through, people, some of it's naturally there, but you can learn. You can learn, it may not be great at it, but you can at least learn how to dissect it, go through the process. And then from there, go and figure out what you're going to be great at.
And then go hang out with people that don't agree with you.
Yeah. Well, then
a lot.
That's why my friend Amanda and I get along so well, because we basically don't agree on just about anything. And we just kind of go, okay.
Because at that moment, you learn respect for people, right? And it's Thomas Jefferson said, my disagreements with another man has never been a cause for me to hate them. And that's what we've lost, right? Nothing great in human history happened without dissent. It's why they saved the dissents in the Supreme Court.
Right.
It's why the dissenting opinion is so important in the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And regardless of what people may feel about, Amy Coney Barrett, one of the things that was interesting to me is that who she clerked with in the Supreme Court, I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Scalia.
What's that?
She clerked with Justice Scalia.
Oh no, one of the other clerks.
Oh, one of the other clerks. Okay.
Yeah, he's a Harvard law professor, considered a constitutional scholar. They did it at the exact same time, and what he said about her was this. And I hope everyone that kind of doesn't necessarily like me will say something along these lines, because I think it's the best compliment you can give someone. And he said, I believe that Amy Coney Barrett will make a good judge, if not a great one, even though I will disagree with every one of her opinions.
But okay, so when you look at the courts, right? Not individual lawyers, but when you look at the courts, one of the hallmarks of the nuance of the Supreme Court is what they call the odd bedfellows clause. Like that Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were great friends. They used to hang out together, go hunting. They were homies, right? And they very rarely ever agreed on any opinion, right? Because what they're saying is, hey, I can disagree with you, but is your point grounded in some sort of intellectual rigor, right? And if it is, I can respect it. I don't have to agree with it. I can respect it, right? And the other thing is consistency, right? You don't have to like Scalia, right? I'm not asking anybody to. I'm not asking thing. You don't have to like him, but every opinion that he rendered and every vote he did was made using the same calculus from the day he was there to the day he wasn't there. And that's really, when you start talking about leadership being a titan in an industry, whether it's government, business, being in the military, it's consistency, right? And it's relationships. That's relationships. Like, how do you know you love your wife, right? That's Simon Sinek, puts that out, right? And everybody's got a lot of things, but for the most part, I think when you respect somebody, when you're in love with somebody, when you're a friend of somebody and you have a great relationship, a lot of it's based on consistency, right? You know what you're going to get when you talk to me, right? Or I talk to you or other people. But I'll say this, and I'll say this from hey, here's the canary in the mine. If you know somebody to be a certain consistency and they behave a certain way every day, when they stop behaving that way, start asking why, right? Because in most cases, that's somebody reaching out and saying, I need help. I need assistance. My life's not going great anymore. I don't want to be the person that you're asking me to be right now, right? Because I need something, right? And that I think is one of the hardest things to do, is raise your hand and go, I need help. And how it manifests itself, if you're usually like, hey, that's all right, I'll take care of it, no big deal. And you go to, hey, F you, why are you asking me to do this again, right? Or some variance in between, or you go passive aggressive, or you do a lot of things that are normally not in your nature, or you're with somebody and they're doing things that are not in their nature. That's the time to say, hey, what's going on, right? And not do it in a way that's like, hey, why are you dressed like that? Hey, what caused you to pick that out, right? And use things. So you take it, if everybody can imagine anything in their own relationships, now multiply it out to the breadth of decision making of the government with a 24-hour news cycle and all the craziness that goes on with that, right? I mean, she's going to get confirmed, whether people like it or not. She's going to get confirmed, because even the Senate Democrats, like, we don't have the power to stop it, right? And again, I'm not getting into an argument about whether you think it should happen before the election or after the election or anything like that. It doesn't matter. Right? What matters is it's the ability to do it lawfully is there. Right? Is it a political football one way or the other? Yes. But on the other side of the coin, when you get Joe Biden will not answer he won't give you a coherent answer on packing the court now, when in the past he's chided against it in the 80s. Right? So what's the change? Why not just go, well, hey, I've got a clear record on this. And if you listen to him, if you go back and listen to what he said, he goes back to the last time the court was tried to be packed with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? And he was saying it was an error then, and when he was talking in the 80s, he's like, it's an error now, right? And well, if he won't say it's still an error, then what are we saying, right? And I think being declarative in how you feel, what you believe, and who you are, whether you and I on a Sunday morning talking, whether we're on a camera or not, or whether we're sitting in the same house or not, or being in front of on the global stage in front of the media, having to answer questions, I think that it just doesn't resonate with people. Right?
Yeah, I tend to agree. So the professor is Noah Feldman, for those that wanted to do it, who's a legal scholar. But here's something that I like about what Joe Biden did in the debate, and I think he's absolutely right. And I think this showed at least his command of being a good public servant. When he said that, well, your friends in the Democratic Party say this and they say that, and he said, as of right now and until this election is over, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I am the Democratic Party. It's what my policies are putting forth is how we're going to have to go. I kind of like that piece. I mean, at least it showed that. I
think every presidential candidate, whether they say it or not, that's the platform they're given and the gavel they're given the minute they win the nomination.
Yep, absolutely.
They should be, right? They should be. It's not like if you're saying, hey, we want you to be the president, we're also saying we want you to be the leader of the party and we want you to guide what we're doing deeper into the 21st century in this case.
Right. And this is the thing that, I think that the amount of times that the Democrats put up, oh, we're going to pack the court. We're going to pack the court. If I were now currently the president and I'm hearing this, you know what I would be doing right now? Every 2 weeks, I would have another Supreme Court nominee.
You'd eventually get to me, because you're not. Funny and oddly enough, you're not required to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court.
No, you're not. No, it could be. But I would literally right now. All right, once Barrett's done, I'm putting up another candidate, and I'm just going to go. All right, that's exactly what I would do because I'm going. All right, if you're going to threaten me, then I'm going to use your threat in the exact same way.
Well, I don't even know what to think anymore. Like there's times where I'm just like, okay, I'm going to turn it off. People say, hey, did you watch the debate? Did you watch the debate? Did you watch this? I'm like, no, I'll get the highlights later. We could cut out some of the nonsense and I can do it in a way that's I'm not going to hurt myself or anybody else's feelings as to what what makes a good candidate
for me.
In anybody, when people
first you're not a Democrat or a Republican. That's my first.
No, it's deeper than that, right? I'm talking about the mechanics of a candidate, right? Whether it's mayor, senator, congressman, whatever, up to the presidency. You have when you enter the race, you as a candidate have a significant amount of undecideds.
Sure.
Right. It's one of the reasons Hillary Clinton was an awful candidate, right? Because she had been in the public eye for so long that you don't walk around anybody going, oh, I think she's okay.
Yeah, people already made their mind up.
Right. And so you have strong opinions on one way or the other, right? And that doesn't lead to a good candidate, right? When I think when you look at, even Trump, right? I mean, when he first got on the stage, it wasn't the vitriol it was now. I think near the end, we're like, hey, this guy might actually have a chance. That it really got to be bad, right? To the point now where, any political commercials of anybody, like whether it's a local guy running here in Virginia Beach or up to I can't even watch them anymore because, like, what are you trying to say, right? Do you touch puppies on your off time? I mean, like just tell me what you're wanting to do. If you're elected, what's your intent? And don't talk like you can actually get it done by yourself, right? And I get it that there's a certain level of narcissism that has to take place for you to run the United States, want to be the president of the United States of America. And we've, I think, done enough of not teaching kids that, like, hey, you get some other people here that play in this, not just the president, right? But I also think it's a layup for the media to really focus on everything on the presidency and not have to dig too deep into Congress, because even just like try to go in the Senate and just deal with the Senate rules, right? Just to move, just the obstacles of getting things done, right? There's staffers that make an entire career and are completely overpaid by staff if they're great policy and rules people, right? The whole arcane nature of what they do. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's the government we've built. And how do the government, it was never designed to move in a non-emergent fashion, in a snap fashion, right? It's why the Senate is designed the way it is. It's why there's the back and forth in the legislative process between the House and the Senate. It's why, it's why the executive branch is built the way it is. And the legislative branch or the judicial branch is designed to do what? It's the only branch that's by design to protect the minority, right? Because they can render an opinion for one person, right? In theory, a congressman's job, a senator's job is to look at the legislation and go, is this going to be good for the largest group of people that I represent? Right? If the answer is yes, then vote for it. If the answer is no, then don't vote for it. Right? But that's not like, it's like we were kids. They had the after school thing, like I'm just a bill. I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting on Capitol Hill. Like they left a whole bunch of stuff out of that song.
Right.
Right. But it's not, it was never intended to be harder than that until human emotion and selfishness and, hey, how are we going? And, to a certain extent now, the U.S. is part of a global community, interconnected global community, and what effect can other nations that want us, to quote Kennedy, to wish us well or ill, what net effect can they have on what goes on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'm wondering, because I ponder this because it's not too far away, is how much changes 4 years from now if President Trump is reelected, and if Biden becomes president, then do we go back to a lot more of Obama-like policies, which there are many of them of which I do not like. I mean, President Obama took the aspect of a police state, which is essentially why Silent Circle got created where we were at. And even though this also gets back to this aspect, which why I still oppose everything about Edward Snowden, in that he committed an illegal act, and it doesn't matter to me if anything positive came from it because he still committed an illegal act.
I agree.
Poisonous trade, and yes, a lot of stuff's come out that shown this, but from an economic standpoint, and this I think a lot of people need to think about, and I don't know necessarily the answer, but where I look at is the amount of jobs that left the United States and the amount of revenue that is no longer in the United States from the Fortune 500. During the Obama administration, 63% of the Fortune 500's revenue shifted outside the United States. And the hiring, I believe it was 41%, and someone can fact check it, but it was somewhere around that amount of jobs that left the United States and were then put overseas. And that was just from the Fortune 500. So while it looked like there was this big, huge economic boon, and there was, because that meant the Fortune 500 companies were making more net income because their expenses became a lot lower.
Right.
So, and hey, you're a company. You're as a public company. Forgetting Fortune 500 or not, if you're just a corporation, you're public in some way, shape, or form. Your job is, and your loyalty is to your stockholders.
Right.
It's about stockholder value.
Yeah.
And
rule number one,
you use the policies accordingly, and that meant, of course, they're going to go overseas. So the way the federal government, and I wish, and it may happen if Biden might be listening. In that, okay, I know this is going to happen if I come back in, because this is just, I've said I want to do certain things. Well, we give tax credits for everything. Why not give tax credits to these companies? Or how about even better, because the majority of the companies that keep this country doing well are the small business owners. Why not put more money into that, or tax credits to keep the jobs here? They give tax credits for everything else. Why not?
When it comes to the big boys, you get media-driven envy, right? Yeah. And we use dollars or percentages based on which makes it sound more heinous, right? You'll say that,
before you said, I didn't finish my one thing.
Oh, sorry.
President Trump is still here 4 years from now. The country's I believe it's the exact same spot of what it's in right now. I don't think our economics are still there. I mean, COVID's gone away, but I think largely what we had, I don't think anything is going to get done because he's not willing to go talk to Nancy.
I don't know who's willing to go talk to who. I don't think anybody's willing to talk to anybody, right? I'm not,
that's kind of my point.
It's not like he could just walk over there and say, "Hey, can I sit down in your office?" She's going, "Oh man, I've been waiting for you to show up," right?
Yeah.
I mean, or pick anybody. It doesn't really matter, right? I mean, I think that's the bigger part is, we've gotten a very small group of Americans holding the rest of America hostage for an election, right? And right now, and what's it going to be later, right? I don't know.
I will absolutely, whichever candidate comes out and says this, that they will keep the current alcohol taxes exactly where they are right now and will not let that expire on January 31st. That's the one I'm voting for. I will get rid of the libertarian aspect if either the Democrats or the Republicans say they will keep the taxes the way they are right now.
Nostradamus is Latin for "it's all about me." It's like, It could be worse. It could not be about me.
Right.
See, I got you. I don't, like I said, I don't get worked up about it. There's a few things in life I get worked up about, and I can't anymore. It's just what's going to happen happens. And you get out and you have one option, and that's the vote, right? I personally am not this whole mail-in voting thing. What I am is I want full participation, right? And if the government says they want full participation, then you have to do whatever it is in your power to make it easy for people to vote.
Yep.
Right? If that's erecting ballot boxes on each corner and using technology, being able to do it on a mobile device with certs and everything, I mean, all of that's up for discussion. But demonizing the U.S. Postal Service for a problem that Congress largely made with the U.S. Postal Service is crazy to me, right? Where they're like, oh, the president's ordered all the mailboxes pulled up. No, that's been an ongoing effort. As more people do less with paper mail and it all goes to electronic stuff, there's less mail being delivered. In any business other than a government function, you basically modify your service offering to fit the customer base, right? Very few pieces of mail end up in my mailbox that are actually worth anything other than being in the trash.
Yeah, but I have a great example, or a great way in which the Postal Service won't have any issues with delivering the ballots. Don't deliver the junk mail. You know which ones are which. I'm okay if the junk mail is late by a couple months.
Right. I know. I got it. Like I said, I'm not, like I said, but little things like Congress making not little things, a massive thing actually, making Congress or making the Postal Service fully fund retirement annuities out to, I think it's 75 years. I mean, they're basically asking them to pre-fund retirement for people that aren't even born yet that are going to work for the company. Right. And then you wonder why they're in financial trouble. Right. And then losing delivering Amazon packages on a weekend probably didn't help out either. Right. And so, the Postal Service is largely becoming anachronistic. Right. You don't have if you want elections that we say we're accountable and they're legitimate, let's figure out how to do that, right? And it's not by willy-nilly passing out paper ballots, right? It's by making the system, making it easy for people to register, legitimately register, and then making it easy for them to vote, right? If you're not talking about doing that, then, and when somebody says, well, I heard locally, we closed somebody down because it was expensive to have this other polling place. Who cares? It's giving everybody access equally and evenly to their right as a citizen to cast their ballot, right? And if you got people standing in line to vote for any protracted period of time, it's wrong. It should be, hey, let's go, let's get it in here, right? And when we have the participation we have, we tend sometimes to get the results we had. I think it's just, it's going to be interesting to see over time how this kind of all manifests itself. But it's like, I think if you look at other countries, like when they're burgeoning nations that all of a sudden they elect freely for the first time, they go to the ends of the earth to make sure that they can get what they call full participation, however they quantify that, right? 80% and 90% of the voting. But the other thing is, have we created a system where it's just apathetic? Like most people are like, it doesn't matter whether I vote or not, it's who gets elected, all the outcome's going to be the same and I just get to hang out, right? And do we have to change that perspective as well?
Well, that starts back with the education. People don't believe that they matter, and I'm really with you when it comes to the mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, however you want to do it. The goal should be 100% participation, and all the people, and it doesn't matter which side. Everyone says there's voter fraud. Of course there is. I mean, we're going to get rid of it.
Vote early and often.
Right. So, but how much is there? If we got a 90% voter turnout, which is a pipe dream, it's right.
Not legitimate accountability for 90% of the voters.
Right. If 10% of that was fraud, which would be an awful lot of fraud.
Enormous.
So that means 80% of it's legitimate. Well, that means we got 29% more voter turnout then.
So riddle me this. Do we think that voter fraud is more insidious at the local level or the federal level?
Local. I think it's local.
And I don't think it's voter fraud.
What do you think it is?
I think it's what I like to call candidate installation.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And all you people in Virginia Beach can at me all you want. I don't care. You can come to my house and we'll fight. Right. Because we have a huge tourism business here. It largely is a couple $2 billion in revenue a year. I mean, we're taking it in the shorts this year, but that largely, in some measures allows us to have nice things. On most occasions, our city council, everybody on the city council has some play of what goes on there. Right. And it's everywhere. And it's like, I grew up in Boston, right? I mean, you want to see people, jockeying for themselves, do that. But when you start, when we start doing effectively what I call to be candidate installation, we don't look at one of the elected leaders who his district became where his business was, not where he lived, because he wanted to defend all of his businesses at the tourist area, right? So he used it, nobody called him on it, right? And then when he's voting on things for down there that specifically have a net effect on his business, they were like, well, did you vote? He's like, oh no, I recused myself. My next question was, well, were you out of the room when the vote happened? No. So everybody votes to take care of each other, right? I mean, so this is a national problem. It's not just here. I just see it a little bit more. But when you start talking in that rate, that's when, all of a sudden local taxes go up and things start creeping to the point where you have people bail out of states because their net effective state tax rate with local taxes, fees, and ordinances and stuff gets to be so onerous. So like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave. And businesses, there's some obscene number of businesses that have moved into Texas alone from 3 states. It's California, New York, and one other state. I can't remember what it was, but over the last, 8 or 10 years. Why? Because their population was like, uncle, I can't pay anymore. I'm unwilling to pay anymore, right? Everybody can pay more, but what are you doing for your lifestyle, right? And when it gets to a point where people are like, hey, I can't go out to eat when I want because I got to think about that or putting gas in my car. They're like, well, if I go to one of these other states where I don't pay a state tax, athletes are thinking that way. Right, you take a mid-tier exception, and NBA players probably make $12 million a year, whatever, $8 to $12 million a year. Not the LeBrons and not the high-end guys. That guy's like, well, wait a second. If I go to play for Miami or I go to play for Dallas, if those are options for me, I'm gonna save a lot in taxes as opposed to go playing for the LA Kings or the LA Clippers or the New York Knicks. Right. So why wouldn't I go down there? Right. And how many people how many ordinary Americans that aren't in the public eye, that aren't making millions of dollars, they vote if they had the opportunity to vote with their feet and go work somewhere else where they pay less taxes, they would. And that's why I laughed when they got after Trump's taxes that he only paid X amount. Like, how could he do that? Well, he followed the law. Like, if you're unhappy with it, change the law. Joe Biden actually, from what I've read, when they changed, it was 2017, right after Trump got in office, he changed the law and it really affected the SALT. And he has 100,000 less unclaimed or less deductions. What that turns into actual taxes thing. But it's okay. So is that right or wrong? Right? I don't know the answer to that, but like nobody looks at those things. They just want to look at, just like we want to look at the Supreme Court. Well, most of the case made law is done where? Is confirmed where? At the appellate level.
Yep.
Right.
So the Supreme Court to not, hear many cases. More.
Right. That's what I'm saying. While you're busy watching the 9, presidents are trying to basically get as many judges through the system as they can, through the process they can to number one, to fix the system, right? Because we're woefully undermanned in the federal bench. And on top of it is like, while I'm here, let's get people that think like I think on the bench. Right. And if there's a jurist that wants to stay on the bench because he doesn't like the way the president's going to replace them, or he or she, they're free to do that. Unless but when those seats are open, and this is where Congress, both parties, slow rolls putting those people in. It's like, hey, let the process work. Give the guy or girl a hearing and let them go and sit on the bench. right? You might not like what they have to say, but you've got to let the process work. And I think that's a bigger part in a lot of systems, right? We're just not letting the process work for the federal government now.
Well, it's because everything is now about how do we make everything inflammatory? How do we keep?
Oh yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's like just you're killing me. Right? How many acting secretaries of various departments do we have? Acting undersecretaries and stuff like that. Some of these should not be that hard.
No.
Right? If I read this morning, like there's the acting director of BLM, land management. People are flipping out because he hasn't been confirmed. Well, put him in front, like this week, set up a hearing, get him in front of there, get him confirmed or not. If you think he's doing the wrong thing or you don't like his politics about how he's managing the land, get the vote. Right? I mean,
there's a 50% probability at this point, 50.1, I should say, that whoever's going to be the acting secretary isn't going to be there in about 3 months. So I don't know.
Right, but again, it's like pick your battles. Like at this point, and that's the other thing. It's like we got so much space and time to fill with news that you don't like the guy in BLM. Like on January 22nd, start bitching about who has that job. But today, or actually November 4th, start complaining about who's going to have that job. Right? Because right now it doesn't really matter because the nation's in flux. And I think the only thing that's going to happen, whether you like it or not, is that we're going to get a new justice on the Supreme Court.
Or, so when do you think Trump packs the court? On November 5th?
Stop. I'll take shit talking barrel stirrer for 1,000, Alex. Who is Dan Ford? Yeah.
Well, if there's a way to get people incent, and really getting polarized, I could certainly figure out what to say in order to make them get lose their minds. That's
on both sides, right?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean, you say that to either side, and people lose their ever-loving shoes over the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's good. Getting back to, I could care less about the taxes from Trump or Biden or anything along those lines because the laws are the laws. I just what I'm upset with is I don't have their tax lawyers to get my taxes the same way.
Right.
that's all.
That's the design, right? I was I was watching this guy talk about tax, and he was actually, because it was on the heels of the thing, but he was talking about how wealthy people basically use the tax laws at their disposal. I mean, I'm talking wealthy people, not rich people, wealthy people, and use the laws that are at their disposal to mitigate the amount they have to pay. Right. And largely it's ego. So the argument about it is ego driven, right? That you've got more money, I want to take some from you. Right. Unless you're gonna do the Steve Forbes thing where everybody pays a flat tax. Right. Then you remove all the exemptions. Right. Then there's always going to be somebody who feels the system wasn't equitable.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
And this is a thing I think people really forget about. So let's say you make however much money a year, right? So we buy things based on our income. So if I make $1 million a year, that means I'm probably driving a $400,000 or $500,000 car, which means I paid that much and more in sales tax, right? The states are getting their money primarily from sales tax, and so much.
The two things sales tax and property tax.
Right. So a lot of taxes are being paid. I would much rather see less federal tax and more things that are going to help where I have to live, eat, raise families, things like that, be different, because that's what I care about, because that's the communities that I'm serving in one way or another.
But here's the thing, and this becomes the conundrum if you're going to say, hey, I want to lessen the federal burden. The problem right now is that there's such a small part of the federal budget is actually up for grabs every year.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But you can say, hey, we don't want to do this, but no, we're responsible for all these things. That's not even talking about debt load or anything else, right? That's just saying, hey, we've said all these things are important to us enough that we're not going to argue about increases in that spending budget, right? And defense and some of the other things there's a certain lower level, I think, but what are we arguing about on the top end, right? And I think, I mean, if you look at localities, depending on where they are, when you start talking about doing different things with public safety money, I say that euphemistically because it means defund the police, right? What are you asking for? Right? Because then when you actually bring a lot of these people, hey, we're going to stop having policing, right? And the funniest thing, it was humorous to me because it's true. And it was just the way it was said. Al Sharpton was on one of the news programs and they were talking about, how do you feel about defund the police? He goes, defund the police is some Greenwich, Connecticut country club liberal idea. Because down here in Harlem, because we want more police, right? And this goes back to our discussion we had on that thing. It's like, what are you getting for your police, right? What are we asking them to do? And under what conditions are we asking them to do them? And more importantly, how much are we paying them?
I'm perfectly comfortable getting rid of state highway patrols, so that way there's no more speeding tickets.
Well, but what are you going to do? You're going to put someday somebody's in a macro has to tell me what the state police are doing. Right. Because the thing they
pull me over whenever I drive from New York to Indiana.
Well, it's because you have a nice car now and you look like you can afford the ticket.
Yeah. Well,
I was told that once, by the way. I go, look, I was going 3 miles an hour with the speed limit. And they're like, yeah, but you can afford the ticket.
Yeah.
And they're looking at my car. I'm like,
doing 100 miles an hour probably had something to do with it also.
That's a felony in Virginia.
Yeah. 100 on the 75.
Well, there's no 75s in Virginia, but anything over 85 is considered reckless. At 100, it's a felony, reckless felony, or something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, mine wasn't.
When I was driving up to work in DC one Sunday, I was trying to get around a big truck, one of those it was like a double tractor trailer, and the back one was doing this. I'm like, I just see this all going wrong here in a minute. And then I sped up to get around him. I was going like 84 in a 70. And it wasn't the 14-mile-an-hour over penalty. It was the reckless penalty because I was over 80. Now, I called the Lyft lawyers and said, in that county, because it was between here and D.C., it's some rural county, and I called enough lawyers in that area and said, I went to law school with the judge. I'm like, great, you're my new attorney.
Yep. It's all about who you know.
Yeah. And they're like, did you talk back to the police officer? No, I didn't. And I said, hey, by the way, slip it in there. I'm a veteran, a small business guy. And next thing you know, I got some non-specific moving violation and $100 fine.
Yeah.
So as opposed to, because a lot of people, if they look up your driving record for a clearance and stuff and it says reckless driving, that's usually what DUIs get reduced to.
Yeah.
So now you've got to prove, your potential employer, you're not out drinking and driving.
No, I just like to drive fast. That's another one. If any Republican or Democrat wants to get rid of speed limits on federally funded highways, got my vote.
Don't you think, like on some of the Western, like the big sky states, they effectively have, because it's like 80 and they don't put any police out there to do one thing about it?
I wish, but I thought that way going through Ohio. It just didn't work out.
So you remember when I went down to South Carolina to do that speaking thing? This is where I ended up not being able to be on the show on Sunday a while ago, right? I'm driving south. You're in Virginia, North Carolina, both pretty strict states. The cops are out everywhere on 95 going south. When you see the big sombrero at the North Carolina, South Carolina border, you should also see a checkered flag and start waving the race to start, because I was going 75, 80, and people were passing me like I was standing on the side of the road, and there wasn't a police officer in sight.
Not in South Carolina, North Carolina,
in the Palmetto State.
Yep.
I know when you get to Georgia, though, it starts over again.
Does it? Yeah. I've never gotten a ticket in Georgia or South Carolina.
Georgia, and I guess I think this is a good thing. Georgia follows the kind of Virginia. They're similar in that the police, they've taken the discretion to give warnings away from the police from things. So it can't be said that, that person was wealthy, that person was a person of color. So you've taken away. Now everybody gets treated the same, right? Georgia does the same thing. And I have a buddy of mine whose older brother was a narcotics detective in New York City. Gets pulled over. He's driving to Florida. Gets pulled over in Georgia. Shows the guy his badge. Like, do you have identification? Shows him his New York City detective badge. The guy walks back to the car and gave him a ticket. Like, literally walked back took his license and came back with the ticket. And the dude's like, really? And he goes, hey, nothing moves that fast. Nothing in Georgia. Nothing moves that fast through Georgia. He looked right at him and said, Sherman did, rolled his window up and drove off. Right? Because it's like, hey, they don't care. They're not given the latitude to do that. In fact, they're specifically, you know, like when like I know in Virginia, when they pull up, they've got, you know, aside from getting a driver's license or the thing, they've got the radar gun loads into the system how fast they were going, so they can't say, well, it was just 1 mile over, right? And there's obviously, you know, they're not going to pull somebody over for probably 5 and under because that's easily what's the deal? Why are you doing that?
They don't, you know, the magic number seems to be, you know, if you're 11 and over, because of the, you know, they're because then they get too many people that go, when was the last time you calibrated this? When was the last time you calibrated that? This.
Right.
With all it takes is one of those, just one. Oh, we didn't get that one calibrated. Like we don't have the letter on file at that particular moment. And then so they just basically.
Well, if you believe, you know, what your Google Maps or Waze tells you, right? The speed limit that I see on my dash, digital speed limit on my dash of my car is actually 2 miles. I'm actually going 2 miles slower.
Yeah.
Right. And not that I want to test that theory, you know, but you know, it's like there is, you know, there's slack in the system.
Going through the Pentagon's parking lot.
You did?
Yeah. It wasn't fun.
No. Why would you do that?
I wasn't really trying to test it. Like I said, I just drive fast.
You weren't paying attention, and next thing you know, they're like, "Hey, there's a nice young gentleman with a red, white, and blue. Red, white, and blue. How patriotic."
Yeah. Well, then it was my Infiniti G37. So that so I bought it, you know, over the internet. So I didn't even have the temporary tag from the state where it wound up coming from, Minnesota. Their temporary tags are like a sticker in your window.
Yep.
Not on there. So of course I got pulled out. They don't see a tag. Let's just say it wasn't fun.
Were the firearms out?
Yeah, and I was out of the car pretty quickly.
Nice. Not of your own volition.
Yeah.
Not shaking hands. Dan.
It wasn't for shaking hands.
Dan Ford running for mayor.
What
can I do for you today, officer? Yeah. One of the funniest stories is a buddy of mine, two buddies of mine, they're on their way from the beach to Walls, Mississippi to go to a shooting school back in the day. And they crossed over from Tennessee into Mississippi in this town called Olive Branch, about 20 miles, 30 miles away from where the school's at. And they're driving out, really get pulled over. And, you know, they're both from Southern California. So they effectively pull over, keys on the dash, and they've got their hands out of the thing. This is in rural Mississippi. Guy, you know, Jim Bob walks up to him and, you know, ask him why they're going so fast and like that. And he's like, put your hands back down, put your hands back down. Guys show them military IDs. All of a sudden, everything's starting to get better. Like, where you at? He goes, we're going out to John Shaw's place. Oh, John Shaw, why didn't you tell me? Basically pulls his gun out, takes the rounds out of it, and basically hands one of the guys his gun. He goes, you ever seen a gun that's just messed up? Because now he knows they're team guys. But basically just so trusting because now they're military guys, surrendered his firearm to him to show him what was going on.
Wow.
Yeah. And like I said, these guys were like, you know, out of the car like this because they're so used to it being in Southern California.
Oh, well, my friend, I got to get ready to go to class.
Have fun with that.
Yep, go on.
Don't drink too much.
Well, no, today's all about the law.
Like I said, well, they're going to tell you don't drink too much then.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, take care.
Have a great week.